Sometimes the writer finds themselves in the position where they need to give a synopsis of an event or a text or an idea so that they can talk about it in more depth. But that text or idea or event doesn't fit nice and neatly into a really simple synopsis, a really simple, grand overview of what happened or what it's about. In those cases, we need a way to still give a big overview, to still summarize something very quickly and simply, but in a way that has a little bit more nuance, in a way that allows for tension, conflict, or change to happen. If that's you, today I have another move for you. One that writers in all disciplines and across all subject areas use to give a slightly more sophisticated, more nuanced synopsis. Today's move is the pivot synopsis. So in a previous video, Synopsis 101, check it out if you haven't seen it yet, we talked about how a synopsis is a general view or outline. It enables us to see all together, all at once, what something is about. Today's move does that as well, but slightly differently, with slightly more nuance and slightly more sophistication. So in Synopsis 101, we talked about how a synopsis is typically 1 to 3 sentences. It answers the question, what? What is it about? What happened? What's the deal with this? And it gives a pretty straightforward overview. In general, this is what this is about. This is what happened. A pivot synopsis does all of those things, but it does something extra. It adds a pivot word to acknowledge that there is some tension, there's some conflict, maybe something has evolved or changed over time or in the course of the text or in the course of the event. It adds a complication to that pretty straightforward overview of what is this about? What happened here? Let's look at this in a mentor text. So this comes from a review of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever from the Associated Press. Black Panther took some of the spy thriller shape of a Bond movie, and the sequel carries that on in a new geopolitical context. At the United Nations, the United States and France are pressuring for access to vibranium, the rare metal that Wakanda has built its empire on. Soon after, a U.S. military expedition discovers vibranium at the bottom of the ocean. But just as they're celebrating, a mysterious tribe of blue underwater people led by Namor, a pointy-eared monarch in green short shorts with wings on his ankles, ruthlessly wipe out the entire expedition. So you can see that this is still a pretty big general overview. It's still a synopsis. This one is 4 sentences, but we will allow it. It still answers the question, what? What is this about? What is the deal with the sequel, Wakanda Forever? But you'll see it adds that transition word, that pivot word, but, right? It's not just, this is a movie about a geopolitical landscape in which people want vibranium. We add this, but here's the tension, but here's the conflict, but it's not so simple. So we can see that using that word, but as the pivot here, but still giving that big, broad, general overview. Let's look at this in a couple of other mentor texts. Here we have one from Smithsonian Magazine. This is about a historical event. In January 1923, Rosewood was wiped off the map by a week of mob violence, then erased from history by people who didn't want to talk about what had happened to the town's primarily Black residents. Now, Craig Pittman, the writer, may have been tempted to just leave it at this event in Rosewood in January 1923. Rosewood, what happened? Oh, it was wiped off the map by a week of mob violence. But he adds that pivot word, then erased from history, right? It shows us that things have changed. The situation evolved. There's some tension or some conflict here that he is going to discuss. We have the word however used as a pivot word in this book review from NPR. By the end of the first chapter, However, Keith reveals that he's murdered T without saying how or why. Again, we get this big sort of flyby overview. What is this book about in general? But this acknowledges that particular tension or conflict that's going to be present in the book. Here's a final one. This is from economics, right? So even when we're talking about policies and laws and numbers and math, we can still use this word. The primary purpose of the three laws isn't to stimulate the economy. They are mainly intended to combat climate change, rebuild infrastructure, and reduce dependence on foreign semiconductors. But they will affect the labor market, including a reallocation of workers across sectors. So again, we get that synopsis, right? What is this policy or what are these laws about? Oh, combating climate change, rebuilding infrastructure, reducing dependence on foreign semiconductors. We see that list, right, that we saw in the Synopsis 101 move. But they will affect the labor market. There's some tension there, right? There's a little bit of this, but also a little bit of that. Yeah. Not every text is going to call for this, right? Sometimes it is simple. Sometimes it is straightforward. Sometimes stopping with Synopsis 101 is what we really need to do. However, when we're dealing with an event or an idea or a text that's really complicated, and we want to acknowledge that complication, we want to acknowledge that tension, that is the perfect time to drop into the Pivot Synopsis and give it a try. So where in your writing do you need to quickly summarize something, but it's not so simple? Could you take a place where you've written a simple synopsis, a Synopsis 101, and add a pivot word, then, but, however, yet, still, and change it a little bit to acknowledge that there's evolution or tension or conflict afoot as well? Where could this help you quickly summarize a complicated situation in your writing so that you can move on and discuss it in different ways and in more depth? Thanks for watching Mini Moves for Writers. Please make sure that you like us and that you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any moves.